Chapter 11. Was it because she herself had put on 8 kilos since her first visit? It had been 3 months since she had started visiting Kajii at the Tokyo detention house, and now, considering the woman before her, Rika found it bizarre that her looks had been so roundly criticized. She wasn't young, and she certainly wasn't stunningly beautiful, but her appearance was very ordinary. The soft, pale blue jumper she wore today matched her long, heavy white skirt. The sense of self-acceptance that welled up from inside her lent her gestures and expressions a springy bounce. But that was all. She was an entirely average woman in her mid-30s. Rika saw a trace of fatigue cross Kajii's face as she considered her demand. Now, as if giving in, Kajii broke her silence and spat out, "How would I know? I'm no magician. How would I be able to tell where your friend is right now?" She shook her hair from side to side in apparent exasperation. The circle of light ringing the crown of her head dissolved. Rika knew she couldn't turn back now. Besides, Kajii's words only strengthened her conviction. There was no doubt she knew where Reiko was. "Won't you give me the tiniest hint? Can you think of what you said to Reiko that might have made a strong impression on her?" Kajii's gaze roamed the air as if tracing an invisible butterfly. Rika could tell that she was enjoying savoring the stress she was inducing. She hummed, lifted her chubby index finger to her chin and pouted. "Perhaps I'm not totally without ideas. But there's a condition attached to my telling you," she squealed. Her eyes once again assumed an ominous glint. Not again, Rika thought, trembling inwardly. "How did you kill your father?" Rika had no memory of having told Kajii about that day, but these kinds of conversational developments no longer surprised her. "Answer the question, and I shall do my best to remember what I might have said to Reiko." Rika had known since her all-consuming experience in the cowshed in Nagano that she could not go for much longer without facing the subject head-on. Now, she carefully regulated her breathing, working through each bump of fear one by one. "That's what Reiko told me. The reason you're so attached to me is that you feel a sense of responsibility for the death of your father while you were in the 3rd year of middle school. It was her opinion that that was probably all bound up in your head with cooking." "I broke a promise to him," Rika finally managed to squeeze out. She had a sense that in doing so, she might have elicited a little sympathy, that even Kajii wouldn't have it in her to probe any further. But Kajii now leaned so far forward that her face looked ready to brush against the acrylic screen. What kind of promise? Rika made up her mind. The truth would come out anyway, so she might as well be the one to tell it. "I promised to make my father the macaroni gratin I'd learned how to cook in home economics class, and I didn't." "You? A gratin? I thought you didn't even know how to chop an onion." Seemingly oblivious to the sensitivity of the subject at hand, Kajii rolled her eyes playfully. Her long, soft eyelashes had been curled to form perfect semicircles. "The truth is, I used to really enjoy cooking when I was in middle school. I'd become determined to take over the housework from my mother, who was kept so busy with her work. As a result, I was top in our cooking classes. The teacher would praise whatever group I was in. I was her firm favorite." The moment was engraved in Rika's memory when she'd taken the gratin out of the oven and held it up proudly in an oven-gloved hand. A round of applause went up across the classroom. She could recall perfectly the golden brown breadcrumbs, the melted yellow cheese, and the thin skin that had formed across the white sauce. "What was the recipe? I am fond of a good gratin. It's the season for them now, isn't it? This is rousing my hunger. You fry chopped onion dusted with flour and butter and stir in the milk a little at a time. When that's all absorbed, you add in the macaroni and broccoli boiled in salted water and prawns simmered in white wine. Then you pour it all into the gratin tin, sprinkle it with cheese, breadcrumbs, and parsley, and bake it in the oven for 20 minutes, if I recall correctly." To Rika's surprise, the recipe flowed fluidly from her lips. She could even picture the font in which the recipe had been printed, the rounded lines of the illustrations depicting the various stages. In fact, since the age of 15, whenever she'd attempted to make a proper meal, all of it would come back to her vividly, the scrap of loose leaf paper on which she had jotted down various tips for doing it extra well, the branches of the school magnolia tree visible from the window, the path to the home economics classroom which she had walked with her friends. chanting lines from the recipe as if they were lyrics to a song. That was why she had avoided even venturing close to a kitchen ever since. Surprisingly orthodox. I imagined it would be a less painstaking version. I told my dad about it when I spoke to him on the phone, and he said how much he wanted to try it. I would stay with him one weekend a month, so he asked me to make it for him next time I went round, and I agreed. Back then, what Rika had feared the most was silence. When she was with her father, she would talk incessantly, continually coming up with new topics of conversation, intent on allowing no space for him to ask questions about her mother. She felt that if she didn't play the role of the optimistic, high-energy kid who was unfazed by her parents' divorce, if she wasn't perpetually providing entertainment, then she would be eaten up by the loving glances her father sometimes threw her way, by the reckless things that he said. The prince she was at school and the version of her that existed before her father were altogether different creatures. Around her father, Rika was an easygoing, scatterbrained jokester, a chatty young girl who was easily swept along by the latest trends. Even if the alcohol and the bad diet had made him balloon beyond recognition in the 2 years since she and her mother had left the house, even if he was permanently red-faced and dressed in the same yellowing zip-up hoodie, so long as he was rolling his eyes at something silly she'd said, she could pretend to herself that he wasn't so changed after all, and find a comfort in that. Okay, next Friday then. I'm looking forward to it. At 7? It's fine if you're early. That day, Rika's volleyball practice had dragged on. It was that time of year when the sun had begun setting earlier. As Rika looked up at the deep blue of the sky and pulled the lapels of her regulation pea coat tightly around her neck, the thought of getting on the Chua line, shopping for ingredients in the supermarket by the station, and then heading to her father's apartment seemed impossibly arduous. She hadn't told her mother this, but since the two of them had left, there was no sign that the Mitaka apartment had been cleaned even once, and the sinks and the bath were now so moldy it made her hair stand on end. She wouldn't wash when she stayed, and always requested to eat out if possible. These days, her father barely went into university any longer, instead staying home and writing papers the whole time, and the wallpaper had been stained brown by all the cigarettes he smoked. If she was going to cook, she'd have to first clean the kitchen at the very least. She felt envy bubbling up in her towards her classmates, innocently joking around, of a kind she'd never felt before. Rika was the only girl in her class whose parents were divorced. When she called her father from the payphone and told him that she couldn't go over that evening after all because they'd been informed there was a test on Monday, which she had to revise for, it was the first time she'd ever lied to him. "Oh, okay," her father had said, calmly and made to put the phone down, but she'd heard him give a loud sigh. In that moment of silence, Rika's stomach had squeezed into a tight ball. Then he said, in a cold voice, "You think I'm an idiot, don't you? You and your mother both. Some daughter you are." When she made to reply, to laugh and deny it, saying, "Of course I don't think you're stupid. What are you saying?" she realized that this was the same sort of accusation he'd hurled at her mother night after night. She lost the power to speak. Standing in the phone box, she wanted to hold her head and scream. She'd been so committed to making sure he never felt that way about her, and now, with one bad judgment call on her part, all her efforts had gone to waste. She put down the phone without saying a thing. "My father was all on his own," Rika said now to Kajii. "I was the only person who went to his apartment. He was too proud to ask for help from anybody. He had a few drinking buddies by the sounds of things, but nobody he could talk to about his worries. He was starved for the kind of meal you eat with other people. I found the look he'd given me when I was leaving, that lingering gaze, too much to bear. That day, I lied to my mum too, and told her that I'd been round to see my dad, but decided not to stay the night, because the test was approaching. She didn't suspect a thing. When I tried to call him on Monday, there was no answer. At first, I thought nothing of it. But come Wednesday morning, when he still didn't pick up, I had a bad feeling about it. I told my teacher I wanted to leave school early and went rushing over to Mitaka. She could remember the looks that her friends shot her then. Of course they were worried about Rika, dashing off pale-faced, but they were also excited by the dramatic nature of the tragedy which their prince-like classmate was going through, and which they themselves almost certainly never would. He died of a stroke. By the time I found him, he'd been dead 3 days. I only glimpsed him lying face down on the floor from where I was standing in the door, but his body was already beginning to decay. Afterwards, I read up all about it. If I'd met him that Friday, made him dinner, stayed overnight, and the next day, I might have noticed the early signs of a stroke. After a while, Kajii finally said quietly, "It wasn't your fault. You were just a child, and besides, it doesn't sound as though his death was avoidable, whatever you might have done." Her eyes, which had narrowed to fine threads, suddenly popped wide open. "Is that what you thought I'd say?" Her nostrils flared and the flesh of her cheeks jutted out. Her lips glistened. With the smile of someone full of their very favorite food, Kajii pointed at her. "I've finally understood why you're so attached to me. As you yourself know full well, you're a murderer. Virtually the same as me. The reason you can't take your eyes off me is because you seek validation. If I'm proven innocent, you'll be able to forgive yourself. It'll be 2 birds with 1 stone." Rika felt the tension she'd been holding inside her body relax. She felt a far greater sense of redemption at this pronouncement than by the words Reiko had uttered at Niigata Station. "It's not your fault." This woman who didn't tolerate other women had made an exception for her. Kajii was right, Rika thought. I killed him. For the first time she accepted the fact calmly. Rika Machida was a murderer. It wasn't an oversight. She had deliberately forsaken her father and killed him as a result. Thanks to her doing, both she and her mother had been liberated. She loved him. She felt sorry for how incapable he was. Not a day went by that she didn't think of him, and she couldn't forgive herself. But killing him had enabled her to move forward. "If I did kill anybody," Kajii said, "then my method was the same as yours. I simply stopped making myself available. I withdrew the lavish care I had been providing for them up until that point. Somewhere in your heart you're glad that you killed your father. You were relieved to find out he'd died, were you not?" She was right. The ambulance workers who'd spread a blue plastic sheet from the entranceway of the apartment had dealt with her father's body out of her sight. One of them then returned to where Rika was standing with the caretaker and said, "I'm sorry to inform you." What had come out of Rika's mouth was a line even she knew to be unfeeling. "He's dead, isn't he?" She wanted him to be dead beyond doubt. If he'd somehow managed to survive in a compromised state, it would have been even more restrictive for Rika and her mother. I was the same. When they died off, one by one, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. That's one less person to take care of, I thought. Rika did have regrets. If she could have that time again, she would go to her father's place and make the gratin. But she also imagined what it would have been like if her father had carried on living as he was. The father whose very existence felt like a weight around her neck. She still didn't know for sure if she loved him or hated him. "You really didn't kill them then? You never actually laid hands on them?" Kajii shook her head. In that moment, Rika believed her entirely. This is the truth, she thought. This is what I've been coming here all this time for, this moment. Did you have the intention to kill them, though? That will be what the trial hinges on. You could say I did, or you could say I didn't. Isn't that always how it is? Spend enough time with someone and there'll inevitably be moments when you find them a nuisance and wish they'd disappear. Rika recalled the enormity of the irritation she'd felt towards Reiko and her stubbornness in Niigata. Had Reiko sensed that somehow? She now wondered. She felt a shiver down her spine. My motive was the same as yours. One day, out of the blue, they just became too much. The faces of people who thought nothing of making endless demands, of being constantly given things. The way they sat at the table simply waiting to be served, not lifting a finger. Their certainty that they would be taken care of, without even having to try. I began, in an instant, to hate them. I couldn't be bothered to buy seasonal ingredients, prepare them, cook, choose the plates, serve up the food, then clear away the dishes and wash up for people like that. When I stopped being in touch, when I stopped doing the housework and the cooking, they panicked. Some of them became hyper-suspicious and their behavior took on a stalkerish air. Some of them, after returning to life alone, began neglecting themselves and suffered physically as a result. Like babies, all of them, whose mother had ceased looking after them. It's odd, isn't it? Once I had found their incompetence, their reliance on me adorable. I believed, up until that point, that I liked pleasing them. Yet I suddenly saw that it was always just me, working away frenziedly, all alone. Rika didn't fail to notice the slight change in Kajii's expression, the note of sorrow that went sliding across her peach-hued face. Don't get the wrong idea. I like serving men and giving them pleasure. Women who don't deserve the name. But being with just one man, a changeable woman like me gets bored. And yet you haven't given up looking for a marriage partner? It's just that I haven't met the right person yet. I feel like what you're saying isn't cooking is enjoyable, but the moment it becomes a duty, it grows boring. The same is true of sex and fashion and beauty. When you're forced to do something, it becomes a chore and the pleasure disappears. Rika's body felt heavy. She knew this was important, and yet she couldn't bring herself to ask a question. The kind of wife that the men on those sites are looking for is, at base, a woman with no sense of life about her. Their ideal partner would be a kind of ghost. It wasn't at all hot in the room, and yet Rika's armpits were slick with lukewarm sweat. Even the gap between her sleeves and her wrists felt clammy. The quickest way for a modern Japanese woman to gain the love of a man is to become corpse-like. The kind of men who want those women are dead themselves. Indeed, it's because they're dead that they're so terrified of anyone with a sense of life about them. If those men hadn't met me, if I hadn't rejected them, they'd quite probably have died anyway. They were never really here to begin with. Maybe it isn't only the victims, Rika thought. Maybe I also have been dead for a long time. And not just me, either, but Makoto and Reiko and Ryosuke and Shinoi and my mother. The only truly living person is this woman right in front of me. Which is why, as furious as everyone is with her, they can't take their eyes off her. They have to keep on watching her from across the dividing line between life and death as she burns through the rest of her life, living out her desires. But why, when you're so full of that life force, were you attractive to those half-dead people then? I wonder. Ghosts are souls who can't cross over to the afterlife, aren't they? They float around in this one, attaching themselves to the living. What you're saying is so bizarre, and yet I feel like I understand it. Rika's mouth seemed to be moving of its own accord. Her thoughts were coming out unadulterated. I don't really know what it's about, but there are times when I feel as though I'm not participating at all in the scene in front of me. Talking to you is so much fun, Kajii said, smiling innocently. It was a smile like a warm breeze carrying a flurry of petals into the room, a smile that instantly made the space more vibrant. Talking with women can be fun, after all. I suppose we've opened our hearts to one another. I feel like I've finally understood what you've been saying all this time. Don't go along with this any further, Rika warned herself. She could tell that the prison officer was eyeing the clock. Perhaps there were fewer visitors than usual today, because he'd let them talk for over 20 minutes, but their limit was surely approaching. To return to your promise. Will you tell me where Reiko is? Kajii shot Rika a bored look. She opened her mouth and spoke slowly, as if the very act of doing so were extraordinarily bothersome. This was what I said to her. How many tigers did it take to turn into butter? The story of little Babaji. Reiko was the only person that Rika had talked to about that story, but she supposed that Kajii had managed to figure it out from something Reiko had coincidentally let slip. When it came to information that would help her manipulate others, Kajii's nose was nothing if not acute. When I said that, her expression totally changed. Kajii's expression, too, was changing as she spoke. Her face crumpled like a baby's on the verge of crying and her skin took on a deep red tinge. You go on about this woman all the time. Are you that concerned about her? And on the day that I'm prepared to open up to you, too. I've told you things that would get me in trouble with my lawyer if he found out about them, and you don't even seem pleased. Kajii made no attempt to hide her anger with Rika. I'm tired. Leave now. Rika had planned to end the meeting herself for once, but in the end Kajii got there first. It was 3 months since Rika had last got off at this particular station on the Denentoshi line. On leaving the detention house, her plan had been to go to a restaurant near IA station, but before she knew what she was doing, she was standing in front of the ticket gates, calling Ryosuke. "I've still not heard from Reiko," he told her. His voice had a floating, ungraspable quality to it. "I think I'm going to go to the police. I can't get any work done, so I've left work early. Can I come over? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." Outside the station, in Reiko's neighborhood, Rika headed straight for the same supermarket that she had visited before. Hunting for butter here at the end of last year now seemed to her like a distant memory. Rika was fairly sure that Reiko would have cheese, flour, and breadcrumbs at home, so she didn't bother to look for them. Into her shopping basket, she tossed macaroni, frozen prawns, and onions. In the dairy section, she deliberated before picking up a 500 milliliters carton of milk and then began looking for the butter. Due to product shortages, sales of butter are currently limited to one item per customer. It was the same notice as before, but there was far more stock lining the shelves than there had been last December. She picked up a pack of salted snow brand butter and headed to the cash registers. With the sunset sky as a backdrop, the lines of tightly packed houses snaked their way up the hill. Housewives doing their shopping for the evening meal came and went. Once upon a time, Rika would have felt overpowered by their unerring sense of purpose, but now she blended in among them with no discomfort. She pushed the button to the Sayama house intercom. The planters housing a mix of violas and daisies looked as well-kept and brightly colored as ever. She reminded herself that it had only been 5 days since Reiko left the house. "Hi. Thanks for letting me come." Something felt markedly different about the house from her last visit. It wasn't that it was messy. Perhaps it had something to do with Ryosuke's large form filling the hall, but it felt narrower. Rika hadn't thought he smoked, but she could smell cigarette smoke in the air. His feet were bare, he wore a sweatshirt and tracksuit bottoms, and she surmised from the pallor of his face that he hadn't been sleeping properly. "Is it okay to use your kitchen? I want to make macaroni gratin. Will you taste it for me?" "What's this about? Gratin? Right now I'd feel bad about you going to all that trouble," Rika insisted. She wasn't trying to express her gratitude, she had simply come to use his oven. She thought too that knowing someone else would be tasting it would make her up her game. "I'm sure it won't be as good as Reiko's, but still. If you tell me where the knives and chopping boards live, I'll figure out the rest." Ryosuke followed her into the living room and gazed at her with a worried expression. The moment Rika stepped into the kitchen, she felt all the sensations that she'd kept locked away since that day she'd planned to go to her father's come rushing out in one go. Ryosuke, it seemed, rarely ventured inside the kitchen, and he couldn't tell her where anything was. Luckily, it was tidy, and both the sugar and salt were kept in labeled transparent containers, so that Rika got the feel for things soon enough. She had expected to find dirty plates piled up in the sink, but its metal bowl was sparkling clean, and all the taps were spotless. Thanks to her experience at Shinoi's place, she understood better how to use an oven. The fitted oven beneath the hob was new, and its door less heavy than Shinoi's, making it easier to open and close. Beside the microwave stood a row of cookery books. She pulled out one called Home Cooking, which featured a range of Japanese and Western dishes, with dated-looking, brightly colored photographs. She checked the index to find the page number of the recipe for macaroni gratin. Given how yellowed the pages were, it seemed to have been used a fair amount, but there was not a single oil or food stain on it, proof of how carefully Reiko treated her possessions. For lump-free bechamel sauce, use plenty of butter and pour in the milk in one go, Reiko had noted in pencil. Seeing her smooth, fluid writing felt to Rika like coming across a much-appreciated road sign. And she hadn't known that white sauce was also known as bechamel. The instructions didn't say to dust the chopped onion with flour before frying it, as she'd learned in home economics. In fact, there was no frying the flour at all. Instead, you simply stirred it into melted butter. She set the oven to heat to the stipulated temperature. Just as she'd expected, she found cheese, breadcrumbs, and dried parsley inside the spotless fridge. She washed the onions, the cold of the water chilling her to the bone. With reddened fingers, She began peeling their skin. When the smooth white appeared beneath, she placed the onions on the chopping board and inserted the knife. As she'd learned in home economics, she cut it in half vertically, then chopped it perpendicular to the direction of its rings. Her eyes stung, and she blinked repeatedly. She boiled the macaroni according to the instructions on the packet and stirred in plenty of butter. Once she'd shelled and deveined the prawns, she poured in some white wine and heated them gently. Watching the prawns curl up and turn a rosy pink, she felt the sticky feeling that had been clinging to her since leaving the detention house falling away. Looking for somewhere to throw away the prawn shells and onion skins, her eyes alighted on a square plastic container by the wall. She opened the lid to find separate compartments for burnable and non-burnable waste. The non-burnable section was crammed with empty bento boxes from the convenience store. Now she understood why the kitchen looked untouched. She glanced at Ryosuke sitting at the table, staring down vacantly at a stack of work papers. She dropped a knob of butter into a frying pan, waited for it to turn a golden color, and then added in the flour she'd measured out with a tablespoon. In a matter of seconds, the flour began to absorb the butter, growing sticky. Greedily, it sucked up more and more butter. Mixing the contents of the pan with a whisk, she poured in the milk in one go, watching it transform into a runny cream-like bechamel, then blended in the prawns and the onion. Opening the overhead cupboard, she found a pair of gratin dishes right away, a bright sunny shade of yellow, which seemed to speak of a happily married couple. She poured in the bechamel sauce with the macaroni added, then sprinkled on the cheese, breadcrumbs, and parsley. When she'd transferred the baking tray with the gratin dishes into the preheated oven, Rika took off the oven glove and left the kitchen. Her sense that the gratin was going to turn out well put a bounce in her step. "Can I have a look at your bookshelves?" She waited for Ryosuke to nod, then made for the bookshelves that occupied an entire wall of the living room. Without hesitating, she pulled out the book she was seeking. This was where it had all started. If Reiko hadn't told her about this book, Rika wouldn't have got close to Kajii. For the 3 months since encountering this book, Rika had been making her way through the dense jungle, with Reiko by her side, whispering hints to guide her. Yet when she looked around her now, she could only make out herself and Kajii in the hot, humid forest. Reiko was nowhere to be seen. The pool of golden butter spreading out from the roots of the trees. Just then, a slip of paper escaped the book's pages and fluttered to her feet. It looked like a cutting from a weekly magazine. Instinctively sensing that she mustn't let Ryosuke see it, she hurriedly picked it up and slid it into her pocket. "Would you mind showing me Reiko's computer? I think it might provide some clues." He nodded and took out her laptop from the drawers at the side of the room. "I tried to, but I didn't know her password." Ryosuke shook his head from side to side as he spoke. Rika tried entering Reiko's birthday, phone number, and the birth date of her favorite actress, but none of them worked. A rich smell of butter, milk, and cheese all melting together came drifting into the room. "I don't think she's caught up in any kind of trouble," said Rika. "My sense is that she's got involved with something of her own volition. Would you mind holding off until tomorrow afternoon to file a police report? It would really help." "Do you have any idea of where she might be?" Even without looking at Ryosuke, who was standing behind her, casting his large shadow over her, she could tell his expression was one of exhaustion. "Someone from our year at university says she's got a lead." Rika knew that if she turned around now, she'd be outed as lying. At that very moment, the oven timer bleeped. Thanking her lucky stars, Rika slipped past Ryosuke, turning her back on him. She opened the oven door, her senses drawn to the blue flame and blazing hot air filling the dark space. For a moment, she recalled her moment of glory in the home economics classroom. The cheese was making a seething sound. She smiled to see the burnished brown of its surface. At least its appearance was passable, she thought in relief, and reached out an oven-gloved hand. She transferred the gratin dishes onto white plates, brought them over to the table along with forks and cups of water, and sat down opposite Ryosuke. Then Rika picked up her fork and pierced the crispy top layer of breadcrumbs. The bechamel sauce cascaded out from underneath like molten lava, and the macaroni and prawns came into view. Feeling a rush of confidence, Rika lifted her first forkful to her mouth. Just as she was exulting in how both the taste and the amount of salt seemed spot on, she felt something rough graze her tongue. A soil-like texture, which ruined the mellow fragrance of the butter and cheese, the smoothness of the sauce, and the squidgy texture of the prawns and macaroni. She tried to ignore it, but it scraped away at the inside of her mouth. After moving her tongue for a while, she dropped her shoulders and put down her fork. The sauce is lumpy, isn't it? It's horrible. I'm sorry. That's not true. Thank you for doing this. It wasn't that in the intervening 18 years Rika's cooking skills had got worse. More likely on that day, the result would have been the same. She felt her stomach lurch. Rika had been a favorite not just among the other students, but even among the teachers, perhaps because of her home situation. In that small world, whatever she'd done had been praised to the skies. Ryosuke went on eating, his face registering no particular emotion. Rika finally understood. Even if she'd made her totally ordinary macaroni gratin for her father that day, he would still have died. His demise had been inevitable. Even if he'd managed, with Rika's help, to avoid the stroke, he wasn't the sort of person to amend his ways after a hospital visit or two. He would have collapsed again afterwards. The idea that a single home-cooked dish could save a person was a delusion. But how much suffering, how much bondage did that delusion cause for women? To think that a badly made meal like this could have saved somebody's life was arrogant and self-obsessed in the extreme. However hard she tried, Rika couldn't have erased her father's loneliness. Playing the good daughter on that day wouldn't have altered the situation a jot. I've discovered one thing, Ryosuke said now flatly. I always thought Reiko was popular. But over the last few days I've got in touch with people whose contact details I've found noted down in her things. It didn't seem as though any of them really liked her that much. Talking to them, there was no trace of the Reiko I know. Rika was about to reply when she saw her phone vibrating in her bag. It was Makoto. He called several times today. Still, Rika decided to leave it until later. She was always finding her own way to do things, wasn't she? It was the same with her relationship with me and with you. With the flavors she used in the kitchen as well. It was as if in everything she did, she was conducting experiments, figuring things out for herself. Please don't think that Reiko chose you only because she thought you'd be a good person to have children with. When their meal was finished, Rika said her goodbyes and hurried towards the station. She had to get back to the office. There were 4 tigers in the story. 3 of Kajii's lovers were dead. Who then was the 4th? Was it not the man who may well have had a narrow escape? That's who Kajii had been leading Reiko towards. If that was so, then that was where she needed to go too. At 10 p.m., Rika met Shinoi outside a Belgian beer bar next to the office, and they entered together. There'd been no time to find somewhere low profile. Right away, she saw someone staring at them from the corner of the counter, but she decided to ignore them. I think this must be the guy. The first person who she felt really understood her. With these words, Shinoi set down on the table a file that he'd received earlier that afternoon from a journalist previously based in Niigata. Opening it, Rika found a collection of newspaper cuttings. He lived alone in a flat in Agano from 1995 on. His parents were wealthy and had a home near Niigata Station, people of influence who were often featured in the papers. He lived with them as a recluse until he was in his 40s, and then they gave him his own apartment as a way of forcing him out. They sent him money, but rarely went to see him. There were several reports of him behaving strangely, screaming in the middle of the night, being rude to his neighbors, speaking to small children. The only reason he wasn't arrested, despite hanging around Manako's sister and people causing a fuss, was his parents. Rika stared down at the young man profiled alongside his parents in the now-faded article from the local paper. At the time the photo was taken, he must have been in his 20s. His face itself was handsome. His eyebrows were thick, the gap between them narrow, and his eyes were the deepest black, like Kajii's own. His lips were forming a strange expression, so that it was hard to tell if he was smiling or about to cry out in fear. He died last year. Suicide. He hanged himself in his Agano apartment. He was 56. So including her father, he's the fifth person she was close to who died. Do you think there's the possibility they were secretly in touch all those years? I'm thinking about what Anna said, that maybe it was in fact him who killed the victims. I don't know about that. But he did die straight after the verdict of her first trial. As far as I can tell from what you've said, Reiko is a smart cookie. My guess would be that she's trying to solve this case herself. I imagine she's trying to contact Shiro Yokota to check if there's any connection between him and this guy. To help you out, Rika took a swallow of her overchilled beer and winced, then shoveled some nuts into her mouth. Shinoi carried on speaking. You know that after Kajii's arrest, they found enough pesticide in Yokota's house to kill a person? Kajii stated that she'd bought it for the herbs she was growing, but it's possible that she intended to kill Yokota if he got in her way. That's strange, though. Even if Kajii has killed people, she's always made it look as if they were accidents or deaths from natural causes. Why would she take down the fourth victim in such an obvious way? Maybe once she knew the police were onto her, she got desperate? I found this cutting in Reiko's house. Seeing the slip of paper Rika held out to him, Shinoi's eyes turned pale. The clipping was taken from a trashy article in a woman's magazine, not the kind of thing Reiko normally read. Never fear, even if you're overweight or unattractive. Manako Kajii's tried and tested techniques for winning a man's heart. Mr. A said that he had his heart captured by Manako Kajii after living with her for just 2 days. One of her most alluring attributes was her home cooking, he told us enthusiastically. The staples of her weekly menu were dishes such as stews, hamburgers, macaroni gratin, very orthodox choices. It turns out that fancy options are the go-to for arrogant women trying to assert their egos. If you find the man of your dreams, best to appeal to him with tastes that remind him of his ma's cooking, and don't give him any nasty surprises. Mr. A still has several of the condiments that Manako Kajii left in his kitchen. He says he's keeping them there for when she comes back. Yokota really garnered people's sympathy, didn't he? He seemed so pure and naive and kind of tragic. What would Shinoi say, Rika wondered, if she vocalized the question on her mind? Namely, were the tigers, which was to say Kajii's so-called victims, dead to begin with, as she had said? Was that why, when the police told Yokota that he may have had a narrow escape, it hadn't registered with him at all? Are we really alive, you and I? She wanted to ask Shinoi now. Shinoi, who still couldn't part ways with the house his family had lived in, and she herself, still so preoccupied with her dead father. I come across this kind of advice for how to get ahead in life all over the place, with regards to all kinds of things, and it always sounds to me as if the advice hinges on closing off your intuition about the person in front of you. Not perceiving anything about them with your own senses, but just going by the rules you've been given. Do you know what I mean? Shinoi looked at her. Do you think that maybe Kajii's crime was not being able to see people as people, living their own lives? His eyes were now so wide they looked like they might drop out. The lower lids, just about managing to keep them in place, were mauve with lack of sleep. You know, I said my daughter was bullied after she started putting on weight? Rika nodded. It wasn't really that she'd put on weight, she'd just started puberty before the others. Her classmates were afraid of the changes she was going through. And I was too, in fact. I was scared that developing a woman's body meant she'd come to me with questions I'd be hard-pressed to answer. Rika attempted to picture Shinoi's daughter now, a young girl with features like his. I didn't realize what was going on at the time, although maybe deep down I sensed it. But I deliberately didn't cut back the hours I was working. With everything I was doing for her as her father, I thought, it wasn't my fault if I didn't notice. I was ticking all the boxes. Not the boxes of my daughter's needs, but the boxes as they were defined by society. I don't ever want to make that mistake again. I've been doing everything that I can to help you, but... He trailed off and took a sip of his beer as yet untouched, then scrunched up his face. Are you thinking it's best I don't involve myself any further in this case? Rika asked, and Shinoi looked at her, his gaze more piercing than she'd seen it before. As a journalist, I think you should keep going, but as a friend, I wonder. For Reiko's sake as well, I think you'd be better to step back and leave the rest to the police. Speaking of which, I asked Reiko's husband if you would wait until tomorrow to file an official report. I don't want to make more of a big deal of this than necessary. I want to bring Reiko back as if none of this had ever happened." Rika turned around and shot a bald stare at Kitamura, for it was he who was watching them from the corner. He attempted to shield his face with the latest edition of a literary journal, but she'd recognized him the moment she stepped inside. Now she walked up to him and plucked the magazine from his hand. "You were in charge of covering the Kajii case 3 years ago. Do you know where Shiro Yokota's house in Kawasaki is? The man she was living with when she was arrested." "I do, but what's this about, out of the blue?" Kitamura's usual composure had vanished. Even in the dim light of the bar, she could tell that he had flushed right up to his ears. "I think there's a chance someone I know is with him. Will you take me there?" Kitamura's eyes flicked to the space behind Rika. Turning back to where he was looking, she saw her mobile phone flashing insistently from her bag. "Hold on a second," she said. She grabbed the phone and stepped outside to answer the call. "Why won't you pick up? What's going on? Have I done something? Sorry, I'm just really busy right now." She'd left her coat in the bar, and even as she spoke she could hear how cold she sounded. To meet Makoto, who was almost certainly still at work, would take only 2 minutes of her time. His voice, just about maintaining a veneer of cheerfulness, was trembling. "Do you want to break up?" In the years they'd been together, this was the first time that these words had been uttered between them. Rika hadn't conceived of the possibility at all, but now she accommodated it without any particular feeling of disturbance. "Let's talk about it properly when I see you." "What the hell have I done, Rika? Tell me. What's this about?" So now he's talking to me like this, Rika thought. He's talking to me like a man. With the power her mobile afforded her, she cut off the wailing. His reaction was perfectly natural, she thought. Why didn't she feel worse about behaving so cruelly? It wasn't because her head was full of Reiko. In the last few days, Rika had come to realize with clarity she just didn't love him. She'd been able to stay with him for as long as she had in part because they'd barely seen one another, but also because neither of them had really understood what it was for two people to love one another. She had been convinced that it was a good thing for men and women not to stir up one another's emotions, not to encroach on one another. It wasn't just their bodies they hadn't been using, but their hearts and their time as well. They had both, in a sense, been all but dead. Suddenly Rika realized Kitamura was standing beside her, and Shinoi was stepping out of the bar behind him. "I'll be in touch," Shinoi said, nodding at her and Kitamura, then slipped past them down the road towards the station. It had started to drizzle, still so faintly that even when you put your hand out, it took a while to feel the droplets. Would Makoto go on to die alone, like Rika's father had done? Looking up at the office building in the dark, she directed her eyes to the light coming from his department. She'd never seen it with the lights off. Though she knew it was conceited to do so, she pictured his death down to the smallest detail. If that happened, she really would be a killer. Alongside her, Kitamura was looking perplexed. She made to write a message on her phone, then thought better of it and put it away in her bag. If something were to happen to Makoto now, Rika still wouldn't regret the choice she was making. There was a limit to the time they had. Once she'd found Reiko, she'd speak with him properly, she decided. For the moment, she resolved to put him out of her mind. In the darkness at the bottom of her bag, her phone continued to flash. All night long, it lit up the scraps of paper, paper clips, and pen caps lying there, as if confronting Rika with her own heartlessness. The breeze was mixed with the smell of gasoline, but she found it a fragrant, pleasant smell. Was it because her face was so painfully cold? In the morning, Kawasaki's industrial belt was home to several different kinds of smoke, each with its particular smell, and she felt as though she could differentiate them just by sight. Rika had taken the Kihintikoka line to the nearest station, and for the last hour she and Kitamura had been keeping watch outside the 3-story building which lay on a corner of a strip of houses, and which was, they believed, owned by Yokota. It was a fiendishly cold morning, of the kind that made it hard to believe that March was just around the corner. "Do you have any proof that this Reiko person is in there? And what kind of decisive evidence proving Kajii's guilt is she hoping to obtain by moving in with him? I know I'm a fine one to talk, But Reiko's the kind of person who's prone to acting in extreme ways. She's always been like that. It's amazing that you've managed to maintain this friendship since university when you're as busy as you are. I'm envious. I never thought I'd hear you admit to envying anyone or anything. I don't have a single friendship like that, one which has nothing to do with what both parties are getting out of it. That was why I couldn't believe that your connection with Shinoi would be without that kind of motive. Rika was about to reply when Kitamura jutted his left shoulder forward. A short, plumpish man in a down jacket had come out of the building. Was this Yokota? From his profile, he didn't look particularly happy or satisfied. The image of him lying naked with Reiko flickered before Rika's eyes and then vanished. She waited for him to disappear, then ran towards the door and rang the bell. If nobody replied, she thought to herself, she would try turning the doorknob. What would happen if it was open? If Reiko was lying there spread out on the floor, like her father had been that day, would she ever recover? If she'd lost two people she cared about through her own bad choices, would she be able to keep on living? The image rose vividly to her eyes. Reiko's graceful body lying in a room littered with old ramen containers and magazines. She could tell that Kitamura, standing next to her, had noticed her legs were trembling. The door opened slowly from the inside. Reiko. Inside was her friend, standing forlornly in the doorway. There was no lobby in the place. The porch opened immediately on a triangular living space. Reiko stood at the tip of that equilateral triangle. Rika, she said, her tongue moving unsteadily, as if she were saying the word for the first time. The dog at her heels growled at Rika nervously. The kitchen and the living room with its low-heated table somehow put her in mind of Reiko's Tokyo house, although both the area and the positioning of the furniture were different. She must have spent time cleaning the place up, Rika thought. The cheap apron Reiko was wearing didn't suit her in the slightest. An expression Rika had never seen before was papered across the tidy contours of her face. She was pale with nerves. The tightness of her lips and the creases around her eyes all suggested she was as tense as a piano spring. It dawned on Rika that the proper name for what Reiko was doing wasn't running away, or infidelity, or even research. Reiko had been using this little building to play house. In fact, what she had been doing for the last few years was a grand attempt at playing house. This place, Rika understood, was just like a doll's house. When she looked towards the small windows in the kitchen, she felt she could see those black eyes peering through at her. This room, the furniture in it, Rika and Reiko and Kitamura, all of them were little playthings that Kajii had arranged as she wished. She had to say something. Maybe, just as it had been with her father, everything rested on the one thing Rika would say next. Compared to the pressure on her that day when she was 15, this was nothing. Her dry lips moved as if of their own accord. Is that white? I mean, bechamel sauce? She could hear the sound of something simmering in the kitchen. The smell of smooth bechamel sauce with plenty of butter had wafted over and rose up between them. Rika was certain that the sauce would be glossy and scorching hot, with good body to it. That it would have a velvety feel in the mouth and slip gently down to the stomach. She wanted to eat Reiko's food. She loved the food Reiko cooked. It was well executed and delicate, and yet there was a variation, or rather an ardency, about it. Yes, thought Rika, the good thing about Reiko was how extreme she was, honest to a fault, incapable of concealing her passion. She had a stronger sense of individuality about her than even Kajii. Reiko ignored calculations based on profit and loss, winning and losing, and plunged headlong into the unknown. She got hurt more, lost more, than anybody else. It wasn't Kajii whose side Rika needed to be on, it was Reiko's. This pure-souled woman, whose next move nobody could read, needed Rika more than anybody. Rather than sink down to Kajii's depths, Rika wanted to ascend to Reiko's heights. Now, suddenly, it struck her. It wasn't Kajii who was really alive, it was Reiko. She'd been so close to her all this time that she hadn't even noticed. Rika hadn't brushed her teeth since the previous day. She could still feel the unpleasant texture of the lumpy macaroni gratin on her tongue. Beside her, Kitamura was growing irritated and signaling to her in some way, but she didn't have the space to pay him any attention. It's cold today, so I thought I'd make him a stew. I was frying the flour in butter, and I just poured in the milk, Reiko said, her eyes focused on the middle distance. Rika could see it, a sweet stew, with a rich milky taste and large chunks of floating vegetables. A cream stew with depth and a certain austerity, which didn't even bear comparing with the one Kajii's mother had made from the solid roux. She heard her stomach rumble. Even at a time like this, her stomach rumbled, faint yet indubitable proof that she herself was alive. Rika was simply waiting, silently, for the moment when Reiko would tell her to tuck in.